Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. We're just going to wait for everybody to be let into the webinar. So we'll get started in just about a minute or so. So if you're already in the webinar, please just bear with us a moment while everybody joins. A big welcome to you all, and we'll get started in just a minute or so. And again, for those of you just joining the call, I know it's just tricky to get everybody into the webinar at one time. We're just waiting for everybody to come in, and then we'll get started. So a big welcome and good morning to all of you. We'll get started very, very shortly. I'll just give a moment for everybody else to be let into the webinar, and we'll get started. Good morning again for those just joining. We're just giving everybody a few seconds to join the call, join the webinar, and we'll get started in just a moment. Sorry to keep you waiting. Just want to get everybody into the webinar. So we'll start in about 30 seconds or so. Okay, I've just been letting everybody into the webinar. Hopefully everybody who's joining us has just joined. A big welcome to all of you for joining today's webinar, which is Work, Numeracy and Social Mobility. A big thank you for giving up your time and being part of this webinar this morning. I'm Sam Sims. I'm the Chief Executive at National Numeracy, and I'm going to be facilitating the webinar this morning. Before we get started, just to say that the session's being recorded on Teams, and that's going to be available shortly on our website. Well, firstly, to get us all thinking, get our brains active on this Wednesday morning, I want to just ask you a quick question. So here goes. In our recent research, which we're going to be talking about today, 32% of adults who are confident with numbers but don't have a level 2 maths qualification, such as a GCSE, reported that their lack of a qualification has negatively affected their earnings. What do you think was the equivalent percentage of adults with lower confidence with numbers? So hopefully those familiar and who joined the previous webinar will know the format. If you're joining for the first time, don't worry, you're not going to be asked to share or discuss your responses with the group. Instead, hopefully, I'm pretty sure some options have magically appeared on your screen. So if you could please enter what you think. If you can do that quite quickly, just to get us thinking this morning. So just quickly enter the option that you think is right for that question. I'll just give you a few more seconds to do that. Okay, and now let's take a look at the responses that we got. So we have quite a mix across there, but we have a strong favour towards 61 to 70%, so and 71 to 80%. So most of the attendees today thinking that that's going to be significantly higher for those with lower number confidence. We're going to have a look at this a little later, so we will reveal the answer to that specifically in just a moment. But before we do that, for those that are engaging with this area of research for the first time, just some context. Back in April, we launched our first ever research report dedicated to number confidence and social mobility, which was kindly supported by our amazing partner, Capital One, and conducted by another fantastic partner organisation, Research Partners. So the research itself, why do we go about doing that? Well, it's our experience at National Numeracy that building confidence with numbers, combined with the belief that we can all improve our skills, is absolutely key to addressing the issue of low numeracy. And it's this experience that we've had that led and informed the development of the National Numeracy Challenge, which is our adaptive online learning tool, which is now supported well over 500,000 people to take their first steps to building their confidence and their skills as well. But really, we wanted to know what opportunities improving numeracy opens up for people's lives and where those opportunities really take people. So the research has really revealed fresh insight into the power of improving number confidence, as well as there's all sorts of different ways that it can positively impact people's lives when it comes to the work opportunities and also broader learning outcomes. And it also actually revealed a yawning gap in number confidence between women and men. In fact, we couldn't do justice to all of those findings when we launched the report back in April. So we set about breaking it into 3 key areas. We covered the number confidence gender divide in the first webinar in this series back in July, and today's the second webinar. We're looking specifically and more in depth at work, numeracy and social mobility. And to guide us through the findings, to consider their implications, I'm really pleased to be joined by an absolutely fantastic panel this morning. So just to briefly introduce them, firstly, I'd like to welcome Sandra Wallace, a member of the Executive Board and Joint Managing Director for the UK and Europe at DLA Piper. Sandra is a former Social Mobility Commissioner and is a trustee of National Numeracy. I'd like to also welcome Andy Haldane. Andy is the Chief Executive of the RSA and Vice Chair of National Numeracy. Previously, Andy was the Chief Economist at the Bank of England and Permanent Secretary for Levelling Up at the Cabinet Office. And finally, I'd like to welcome National Numeracy's very own architect of impact, Head of Impact and Evaluation, Paul Foss. So a huge welcome to all 3 of you for the panel today. The format is going to be pretty straightforward. I'm going to ask the panel some questions to delve into the research findings and, as I say, consider their implications. Very similar to the first webinar that we did, and then I'm going to take some questions from you, the audience. So please do be thinking about any questions you may have as we go along. Please post them in the Q&A section of this Zoom call. It will probably have to do this on a first come, first served basis. So do bear that in mind and do post the questions as soon as you have them. Last time we had a flurry of questions right at the end and we weren't able to get to them all. But I don't think we will be able to get through all the questions if the first webinar was anything to go by. So I'll tell you what you can do if you have an unanswered question and you do really want an answer to it at the end of the webinar. So let's get started. I'm going to start by coming to you, Paul, to kick us off. And really just to set the context for the research and to talk us through a quick recap of the methodology that was used, and particularly, please, Paul, the relevant findings for work and social mobility, please.
Thank you, Sam. I'm just going to share my screen here. Hopefully you can all see that. Okay. So, yeah, National Numeracy's theory of change, backed up by some of our data, shows that improving numeracy, that's number skills and confidence, helps people feel more able to get a qualification, to find a job or to get on at work, as well as feeling more able to better manage their money and support children with their numeracy. So improving numeracy should therefore play a central role in improving social mobility. And the research aim was to delve behind this broad headline. Now, our flagship program, as Sam's already mentioned, the National Numeracy Challenge, is a free online learning tool designed to help people improve their everyday math skills in manageable steps whilst building number confidence. And in the last 18 months, up until this research, we'd seen over 100,000 people register, and over 20,000 of those users joined our user research panel. So the research was also about leveraging this large group of potential beneficiaries.
Paul, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Just to say, I don't think the audience can see the slides. We can see your screen looking at the Zoom call, but we can't. The slides haven't popped up yet.
Oh, forgive me. Let me try that again.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay.
That's it. We can see them now.
Okay, that's it. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. So the key research questions. What is the connection between improving numeracy and opportunities at work? What role does number confidence play in supporting adults with low numeracy to get on a path to a level 2 maths qualification? And finally, what is the efficacy of the National Numeracy Challenge to help improve outcomes towards qualifications and work? So, as Sam says, we employed the services of an independent research organisation called Research Partners to oversee the work and to create the fantastically detailed report that we launched at Capital One's London home back in April of this year. So first of all, Research Partners conducted stakeholder interviews with National Numeracy employees to better understand our work, the National Numeracy Challenge, and our theory of change. They then conducted around about 20 in-depth interviews with people from our user panel, focusing on those who'd chosen qualifications and work as a pathway to draw out key themes that could be worked up into a survey for all panel members. And some of those key themes that emerged were things like negative school maths experience, the career impact of having or not having a level 2 maths qualification, and also how the National Numeracy Challenge was used to aid further study and career progression. So we worked the survey up, we sent it out to 23,000 members, and we got over 1,000 responses. And then finally, Research Partners conducted a few more in-depth interviews to elicit some extra stories and experiences. The survey data was then enriched with National Numeracy Challenge data, such as demographic data, and also more intervention-specific information, ready for analysis and the report writing in time for the launch in April of this year. And as Sam says, one thing that was very clear after the early analysis was that despite the relatively narrow research questions, the findings were really very dense. And what also became clear was that there was a number of key themes that we wanted to focus on and to create a briefing paper and an accompanying webinar. And those three themes, namely gender, for which we had the webinar back in July, work and social mobility, the focus of today's webinar, and finally number confidence, for which there'll be a webinar on the 1st of November. So why did work and social mobility become a focus? Well, firstly, the key research questions were all framed around the topic of work and social mobility. So that was so needless to say, it was likely to come out as a theme. But secondly, in a similar vein to why we chose gender as a theme of the first webinar, as what we saw is every time we looked at the responses to a survey question or looked at the behavioural data within the National Numeracy Challenge, if we cut that data by qualifications or work status, we saw marked differences between those with and without a qualification and those with or without employment. Now, that's probably not too surprising, but worth reflecting on and taking a look at some of the data that we National Numeracy routinely collect and in other projects we've run. So there are clear patterns to be seen if we look at differences between different social stati, for example, as we can see here in a nationwide survey we conducted in 2019. We asked respondents for their number confidence out of 10, and then categorized them into high, that's 6 or above, or low, which is less than 6. And we've got 78% of ABC ones, that's the middle class, reported having higher number confidence compared to 72% of the C2DEs, which is lower class. Now that is statistically significant, but it's not as statistically significant as when you look at it by number skill. So again, we comprehensively tested the respondents' number skills by asking them 10 multiple choice questions, just as you would find in the National Numeracy Challenge. And then as for confidence, we categorized into high, that's 6 or above, and low, less than 6. And we've got 73% of ABC ones scoring 6 or more compared to 52% for the C2DEs. It's just one example, but we see that every time we look at these kind of surveys. Last year, we collaborated with Experian, another of our partners, to create the first predictive model of numeracy. As we touched on in the gender webinar, the most important factors of the model are affluence and gender. So we can see from the graph there that affluence is correlated with numeracy skill. That's the green line in the middle there. And you'll see the same pattern broadly if you look at confidence against affluence as well. And it's also worth noting that the other two factors that best predict number skill and number confidence are employment status and age. Research partners also conducted some desk research in preparation for this webinar, and we'll be circulating that soon after. A couple of points of interest in that paper that piqued my interest. Firstly, there's this research from the Department of Education and Employment, expounding a powerful argument for the improvement of basic skills. The authors also explained the potential benefits to the individual in terms of wage premium for both numeracy and literacy skills improvement. They also argued, by the way, that the probability of employment is significantly enhanced if an individual's numeracy levels are higher. And then just briefly continuing on the wage premium theme, Pro Bono Economics published this report last year. Well worth a read, very interesting regional variations and commentaries. And the headlines were quite striking. As many as 24 million adults have low numeracy skills. That negatively impacts the UK's productivity to the tune of £25 billion. And of the 24 million with low number skills, it's estimated that 16 million are employed. And of those 16 million, they're losing out in lost wage premiums to the tune of £1,600 each per annum. So on to the research and how they relate to work and qualifications. I have some graphs and quotes to share with you briefly. Firstly, I talked about one of the themes being school experience, and we touched on that with gender, and there were marked differences between males and females. Well, this is the same data, but now this is cut by qualifications and work status. So we asked participants to rate their school maths lessons experience from 1 being the lowest rating to 5. The average response grouped by maths qualification shows a real variation from 2.15 for those without a level 2 maths to 3.51 for those with that qualification. And there's a similar, albeit not quite so stark picture when we compare not working to working. Secondly, we compared levels of low number confidence with the same qualification and working status criteria. So those not working in blue, without a level 2 maths qualification, also in blue, have much greater proportions of low confidence compared with their employed and qualified peers. Thirdly, we asked the ways in which not having a level 2 maths qualification has negatively impacted people's working lives. The findings were that 57% had felt it negatively impacted their career choices since leaving school, 55% their success when job hunting, 42% the ability to perform their job, 42% their career progression, and 47% felt it had negatively impacted their earnings. For those with higher levels of confidence, the percentages are all lower. And for people with lower confidence, they're all higher. And on one occasion, I'll just draw your attention to job performance there in the middle, where it is actually twice as high. So for the quiz question at the start of the webinar, we asked in our recent research, 32, that's the bit on the right-hand side here, 32% of number confident adults without a level 2 maths qualification said it had negatively impacted their earnings. So the actual answer was 52%. So you're a slightly more negative audience than I anticipated, saying I think majority of people have plumped for 61 to 70. So not quite as bad as perhaps you thought. Finally, I just wanted to draw out some of the quotes that will be in the focus paper that we're going to circulate. People regularly talk about the confidence that improving their number skills has given them, not just confidence with numbers, but confidence to take those next steps to getting a new job. people often also refer to having something on paper to prove to others that they are capable and confident of doing a job that involves numbers and data. Similarly, there are often stories of great perseverance, of progressing, of growth mindset, and progressing in small steps, often one level at a time, using the National Numeracy Challenge. And there's also, we saw evidence quite often in the quotes and in the case studies of the National Numeracy Challenge being used as a gateway to a level 2 maths qualification, as well as supporting those throughout the journey into work. So a brief, very brief synopsis of a very detailed, very interesting report, and at that I shall hand back to Sam.
Thanks very much, Paul. Thanks for that run through and summary of the findings there, and particularly putting it into context as well. I'm keen to come straight to you, Sandra, just to firstly get your reaction, your thoughts on what struck you most about the findings and really what they reveal.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. Good to see everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It's delighted to see so many people engaged in this area, so it's excellent to see. I suppose, Sam, I joined the National Numeracy Board and I had a perception that it would be looking at school children, people coming up for those level 2 exams, maybe their parents, and the confidence that they would need to really engage with maths. And then you find, when you look at research like this, that you're seeing 1 in 4 adults saying that applying for a job or applying for a job where numeracy or data or things like that are listed as criteria is putting them off applying. That has a real impact, not only from a very early age, but on our economy and our employment and our skills base. So that was a real surprise that it's so far reaching, I suppose, and how that it can impact the environment that we are working in, and assuming that we've got a talent pool of people out there that can do the skills and the jobs that we need. I suppose, you know, I've got a real slant on social mobility, and it was really good to see this report from that perspective. And again, as an employer, I concentrate on how we get people into the profession, how we get people into working in the business. But if you see how early number confidence can impact someone, it just goes to show that even those entry-level criteria that we look to engage with people in the business, it may be too late, that we need to really look at this number confidence and the fact that people may not even be thinking about you as a professional or as a career because of that low numeracy skill. So that barrier to progression is a real inhibitor for social mobility and improved social mobility. So for me, those things really struck me as critical and things we needed to address.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sandra. And absolutely, as Paul kind of showed and suggested, these are themes we see coming through time and time again, that kind of a barrier, that confidence as a barrier for considering applying for, particularly when you see that as a requirement within a job role, for example. Thank you so much. And Andy, I want to come to you next, please. You know, from your work at the RSA, at the Bank of England, and around levelling up, you know, I know that you've thought long and hard about the skill system, boosting UK productivity and the workforce of the future. What struck you about these findings in particular?
Thank you, Sam. Morning, everyone. Great to see you all. And congratulations to Paul and the team for another fascinating piece of research, which adds another element to the numeracy jigsaw, I think. And for me, the significance of this research was really in providing extra colour and extra context for 2 well-established, if still startling, stylized facts about how our economy works. And the first is that, and this is very much Sandra's domain rather than mine, that most metrics of social mobility have barely budged over many decades. In fact, some have gone into retreat. Despite the best efforts of the likes of Sandra, we have not been roaring forward when it comes to metrics of social mobility. And the second is that what start off as relatively modest-sized gaps in educational attainment at the earliest of years then grow over the life cycle into real chasms of income and opportunity later in life. And I think today's research that Paul outlined helps us make sense of that. It suggests that a lack of number confidence, poor numeracy skills are one of the deepest and hardest hitting of those scars. The reasons for those lifelong scars are many and various, but low number confidence is a key one of them. And therefore, if we could do something to turn the dial on number confidence, starting in the earliest of years, but then continuing over the life course, that is going to show up as a massive dividend for individuals in terms of work opportunities, in terms of income prospects. And those two stylized facts that I started with, we could begin to make some inroads into them if we start to make some serious inroads into the number confidence and numeracy issue. And that, for me, was the broader significance of what's been set out today, Sam.
Great, thank you, Andy. So we've covered kind of the early effects and the ongoing effects of low numeracy, particularly when it comes to number confidence and low number confidence, and having an awareness of that, particularly as an employer, but then also the dividend down in terms of what changing this could achieve. Paul, you know, I've mentioned, and you mentioned a couple of times in your introduction and summary of the research, that a lot of this didn't really surprise national numeracy, because it's their findings that we've seen time and again, and we really wanted to delve in deeper and see a bit more about what happens next and what implications this has. But I did want to come back to you and ask whether there was anything that did surprise you from the findings you weren't expecting to see, or you want to draw out.
Thanks, Sam. Yes, there were a few things, and we talked last time about the gender gap, which was not surprising in and of itself, but how big it was in certain instances was very surprising. I think when we talk about work and social mobility, it was one of the themes that came out of the initial in-depth surveys we conducted with our user panel. And one was about how they used the National Numeracy Challenge, because I guess we probably assumed it was just used in isolation, but what we discovered actually was people were using it in small doses, using it multiple times, dipping in for 20-30 minutes at a time, and doing multiple checks, and then delving into the questions they got wrong, and then leaving, and also using it as a support to other learning. So they would have cases where people were studying for that form of qualification, trying to get that level 2 master qualification. So there were other systems in place, you know, course materials, wraparound support, study skills if you hadn't been studying for a long time, calculator skills, how to revise. But they were using the National Numeracy Challenge as a kind of buddy, as a support, supporting that confidence and growth mindset, because that's not typically addressed anywhere else, and helping them with that, with those elements that we know are so key to improving people's number skills. So that was the most surprising thing that came out that we hadn't anticipated.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. I want to get just briefly into some of the detail that we've covered, some of the detail of the report. So a question here for both Sandra and Andy, and that's if we take the two key findings of the research that Paul shared towards the end there. Firstly, that negative experiences of learning maths whilst at school are linked to lower maths attainment and to being out of work later in life. And two, that a significant proportion of people with low confidence with numbers report that it holds them back in every one of those aspects of work we described, from getting into work to career prospects and earnings. Maybe firstly, Sandra, and then Andy, how do you see this playing out in your knowledge, your experience, and from your perspective?
Thanks. I mean, I think it's a bit the vicious circle that Andy was talking about when he looked at what really came out for him. Essentially, you've got people who are facing long-term disadvantage from things like poverty and other factors, already the findings tell us that that means that it's likely to lead to lower educational attainment. And we're not just talking about maths here. One of the questions or one of the comments in the Q&A already is showing that this can apply to new literacy as well. And the fact is that low attainment, along with already the disadvantage that comes from poverty, housing issues, etc., means that you're entering into a vicious circle. I don't want to be negative on this call, but I think the fact that we've got 90 people on here shows that we've got an audience of people that I hope are interested in trying to do something about this. But the reality is that vicious circle of already lower the disadvantaged background, as well as the lower educational attainment, is going to push into the workplace. It's going to push into people either making assumptions about what roles they can go for, being maintained in low paid work, and not having the confidence and life skills that they need for things like their own living, money management, financing, avoiding debt, and so on. So those sorts of things are a bit of a vicious circle. And I think the reality is this is a key area that I think we can impact when we look at numeracy confidence, when we look at raising skills, and the impact that it can ultimately have on our workplace. So I think if you delve into it, it's that multifaceted approach you're going to have to deal, not only looking at some of the factors that affect people from disadvantage that are faced inevitably with poverty, etc., but also having to tackle this other aspect of a barrier that can affect people in progressing in the UK. And it's only going to affect our economy. That was, some of the information Paul gave us today, it's billions of pounds worth of impact on our economy if we don't get this right. And that it's putting us behind our competitors globally as well. So this is something that I think it does play out in all aspects of the working career.
Thanks so much, Sandra. And Andy, over to you.
Yeah, we should turn to solutions so we don't all make ourselves too gloomy and doomy, to be honest. But on the diagnosis, I'm completely with Sandra. And let me just make a couple of macro points to underscore that. And the first is about young people, fully a quarter of whom leave education loathing rather than loving learning, which then condemns them to a lifelong dislike of doing any further learning. And that then shows up in adults, of course, where we find perhaps a third of the workforce without the skills they need to thrive in the world of work. They aren't just number and numeracy skills, but they're certainly prominent among those skills today. And the truth is that those deficiencies in numeracy will be even more prominent tomorrow. So that skills gap of maybe 10 to 50 million people will grow to 15 to 20 million people over the course of the next decade without interventions. And within that, we know that data skills and data science and big data will be at a premium. So if we do not invest in those base skills of numeracy, that skills gap could get larger still. So I think the diagnosis is actually very straightforward, if still deeply depressing. We have large skills deficits seed in the earliest of years that are set to get larger still unless we do something differently. I'm sure we'll get on, Sam, talking about do differently.
Great, thank you, Andy, and we will indeed. Before we move more firmly into that space, just a quick question again for you, Paul. I'm really interested in both what might have surprised you, which you covered, but also anything in the research that might not be immediately obvious that we haven't covered, anything particularly interesting that we haven't had an opportunity to cover. So just to give you that opportunity to share anything like that firstly, please.
Sure, and I think that was the phrase at the top of my presentation was that national numeracy data shows that improving numeracy helps people feel more able to get a qualification, find a job, and get on at work. And quite often we concatenate that statement and say to get into and on at work. And the stats that I shared with you from Pro Bono Economics say there are 8 million people who are not in work with low numeracy. but there are 16 million people in work with low numeracy as well. So it's not just about getting into, but also getting on at work. And the graphs I showed earlier showed that lower number confidence is it limits career choices, career progression, and earnings, and it's connected with those poor experiences of maths learning from an early age, and then that goes on to impact how people engage with number related tasks and the ability to perform their jobs, and that's what they tell us. I think also what's drawn out is that people say they don't need maths in their daily life. That's not in the research, but in surveys that we've done, people feel they don't need maths in their daily lives, and they think about maths being school maths and not the numeracy at work that they need, which is about measurement, calculation, estimation, reasoning, problem solving, and all of those things, as well as the confidence to use maths in the right situation at the right time. So I think traditionally, we think about improving numeracy about focusing on the education system and the workforce of the future, but we need to think about the 16 million who are actually in work already, and give those people the opportunity to make the most of their futures.
Thank you, Paul. And it does. I see that there's lots of questions and comments coming through on the Q&A. So before we go much further, I just wanted to come to actually a few of those. Particularly, one of those really does relate to that point that you just made, Paul, about the perception of maths and the difference between maths and numeracy. And I think that's particularly relevant as we look at employment and employers. One of the points coming through on the Q&A is that at a local level, organisations are finding it hard to engage employers around improving numeracy because of the perhaps I would argue the perception around what numeracy is, and maybe seeing it much more about maths at school and not necessarily being able to see that and make that immediate connection into the things that we need numeracy for in every single job. So I think one of the solutions there about engaging employers is all of us making a better case for the difference between what we might perceive to be maths and actually how it really can be harnessed to help us make effective decisions, analyze data, make informed decisions at work, and how that can benefit an organization as well as individuals. I also just quickly want to ask you, Paul, a few points of clarification from questions that have come through, just to very briefly touch on. One is, could you just briefly explain how we measure confidence for this work? Another question was whether we look specifically at industry areas. Another one is related to age, if there are anything findings relating specifically to age groups. And another one I wanted to pick up on was if we could explain just the level equivalence as well, when we talk about level 1, level 2, level 3, etc., what those are equivalent to. And I think, Paul, you might be able to briefly answer all of those before we move on. Is that all right?
That should be totally possible, I think. Yeah. So from the top, measuring confidence, it's simply a scale from 0 to 10. How confident do you feel using numbers in everyday situations? And it's the question you get when you first join the National Numeracy Challenge to gauge your confidence. So that's confidence. Industry areas, we didn't look at industry areas. The Pro Bono Economics report about counting on recovery does start to split into industry areas, and there are some very interesting findings cut by industry and region. So they're really interesting to look at. We don't look at that. Age groups is a very interesting one. There's never a nice pattern, like old people think this and young people think this. Typically, we see skills and confidence improve with age, typically. In this research, I think the question was around negative school experience. We didn't see any age differences there. It was quite a lumpy, bumpy line, but there was no kind of real clear picture. So unfortunately, I can't shed any light on that. And with regards to levels, yes, level 2 is the equivalent of a maths GCSE pass. So in today's money, that's a 4 or a 5. Think I've covered everything?
I think you've covered everything there, and that's brilliant, Paul. Thank you. I want to come back and to Andy and to Sandra. Again, to really think about where we go from here. So we've reviewed the findings of the research, and thinking perhaps from your experience, you mentioned, from that experience as a social mobility commissioner, Sandra, what do you think all of us, we've got a really diverse group of people on the call today, from business, from across government, and from across charities and civil society. What should we be doing to address this issue of low number confidence in terms of the way it holds us back from getting into work and career progression? So what kind of should we be doing, all of us, to change this? And if you could just do one of those things, which one of those things do you think would make the biggest difference?
That's really unfair, because I'd of course want to say do the numeracy challenge and understand what that means and raise awareness about that. So that's my pass, I can say. But I think the main thing is you don't really know the extent of an issue as an employer until you ask a question. And anything we're doing on research and social mobility, gender diversity, all the things that we do on inclusion in a workplace, you don't really know the extent of the issue you might have until you try and measure it. And I think this is one area that it would be good maybe to test. I think someone in the questions talks about Multiply and what they're trying to do in their region on Multiply, which is the government initiative on improving numeracy. And I think if you speak to a workplace, if you speak to your workers, if you do engagement surveys, I think it would be good to try and understand if people are honestly telling you number confidence is holding me back, or I've not applied for a role because I've been worried that this low confidence has made me nervous about whether I'd get found out. I think if you could actually establish if there is an issue in the organisations or the workplaces that you're in, we might start to get a real picture of how much this is affecting our economy. I don't think there's anything that sort of work going on in workplaces right now. We're doing a lot of other measuring, but I do wonder if this is an area, given the skills and the imperative that Andy's just talked about, that we really do need to get finger on. So that's something I would encourage people to think about. How could they incorporate their understanding of the levels of numeracy and confidence within the places they're working and interacting or volunteering or etc. And if they can find that, if they feel there's an issue, then we can look at what might be out there to help.
Great, thank you, Sandra. So that, employers being curious, open to understanding the issue itself, and we've seen over the years that this is a real barrier. Partly, I think, because of the perception of what we're actually talking about, or misunderstanding of what numeracy is and how it can support a workforce, but also that kind of acknowledging that there might be an issue and being curious about that. We've seen that can be quite challenging for organisations, both organisations and individuals, employees within organisations. On the one hand, I think culturally we have this sense that it's okay to say I'm bad at maths and it did me no harm, but when that comes to the workplace, that doesn't really translate. Also can be quite vulnerable to people. Showing that vulnerability can be very challenging for people. So how do we get to a place where employers appreciate the way it might be holding them back and the benefits that improving numeracy could offer them, and make it be curious about understanding the levels of numeracy in their organizations, and employees feeling confident and okay to talk about that and to feel safe in doing so, and supported, and that they can make progression. Andy, could we come on to the same question for you, please?
Yes, I'm happy to pick up maybe a couple of reflections from me, one on the younger person side and then maybe one at the adult and business side. I mean, on the younger person side, could you conceive of a system educationally that's more corrosive of number confidence than the one we have? I'm not sure that I could. I mean, the current design, for example, of our GCSE maths framework, I mean, preordains failure for huge numbers of people, and we know that they never recover from that. So I must admit, if we really are going to go at this full throttle, I think that needs a total rethink. The current system is plainly silly and plainly failing a great many people. So we need to scrap it and do something much better. And we've seen some encouraging noises about doing that by a few schools latterly. We think that would be a much broader based root and branch rethink of our educational model. and one that tailors and personalizes learning journeys to a far greater degree than has been the case in the past. That one that is nurturing of confidence, not just in numbers, but in other things as well, including reading and practical work, in a way that doesn't leave those lifelong scars that we've spoken about and the research reveals. So that's the younger person bit, which is a broken educational model, still trading off a 19th century technology, which is madness. And then at the adult level, we don't remotely have a lifelong learning infrastructure that can support adults to learn about numbers or indeed anything else. Our businesses, for what it's worth, also do a miserably poor job in training their staff. That's why we're bottom of the international league tables for training spent within our businesses. So that too is a broken model. And it should come as no surprise that we have those skills deficits when we have a broken model of both education and young people and learning and older ones. I've got some suggestions about what we might do within businesses as well. You might start, of course, by recognizing and rewarding through the tax system skills built in businesses, and the same as we do when people invest in kit. We advantage investment in machines, but not investment in people, and that makes absolutely no sense from a level playing field perspective. We have a smattering of decent directional initiatives policy-wise. Multiply is one of them, and the challenge certainly is there are others besides. But the truth is, Sam, to make a numerical point, they are a decimal point out when it comes to rising the scale of skills deficit and challenge that we face. So I think there's loads we can do, loads we should do, but it will require a scale of effort and a boldness of initiative that I do not see out there right now. And I really hope that National Numeracy can lead the charge on some of that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. A shift in scale is really what's needed here, as you say. And I do want to just pick up on a few points and questions coming through on the Q&A as well, because I think, Andy, you've covered some of those here. We've got a few comments about, when we look at number confidence, coming right back to, I think, Sandra, your first answer, that this starts young, and employers need to be aware of this before, what they're missing out on in terms of before people join the workforce, and it goes way much back, further back, right to the beginning of our lives and our education journeys, and doing something to create a system that builds confidence and makes sure that every young person leaves education with the confidence, either that they have the skills and qualifications, or that they at least believe that they can improve and be open to coming back to that at some point in their lives. At the moment, that's really not what we're achieving. So I think a number of the comments and questions are coming right back to, well, we should be starting earlier in the journey here, much with younger people thinking about confidence and attitudes in the earlier stages of education. Another theme coming through on the questions as well, and comments on the Q&A, lots about workforces and engaging employers. A question about whether we've seen some good practice around the Multiply Adult Numeracy program in terms of employers engaging adults. I don't think we've come across any, standout examples ourselves in looking at this across the country. What I would say is that might be of interest is having a look at what National Numeracy, what we're doing with organisations like the Lincolnshire Co-op, where we do have an organisation that's really interested, coming back to the point we made earlier, interested in its workforce, interested in the numeracy levels, and interested in making it accessible and safe for people to talk about that, and put in interventions to improve that. So those who are asking about those good examples, please do have a look at National Numeracy's work with Lincolnshire Co-op, which is featured on our website, and I can pick up with those few people who have asked about that as well, to give you a little bit more detail about what we're doing with that employer and how that's really covering the whole of the organisation and workforce. The other one that ties into this, questions coming through about the NHS. Could we provide more contextualized support in different settings, like support that's contextualized for the health service. It's actually something that we do at National Numeracy and have been doing for many years, and we've seen some real benefits to doing that. Providing that really closely contextualized examples and ways of building confidence and skills to a career path or to an employer can be effective. Although more recently we've seen actually that it's not been a barrier to take a slightly more generic approach, as long as we're making everything as relatable as possible. And finally, just a point I wanted to pick up on from the Q&A as well about working again in the NHS. A lot of the interventions, the comment here is that when it comes to improving people's numeracy, are really focused on maths and not enough about building people's, I think the implication, not building people's confidence and their attitudes before getting into skills building. And that's something we see time and time again, and I think this research really demonstrates that, yes, we've got to, of course, work to build skills, but we've also got to acknowledge the connection as a precursor to building confidence with numbers as a really strong foundation to going on to building skills. So I wanted to pick up on those questions from the chat that we've done. I want to come back to the panel, maybe for one last question, and then we might have time for one or two more of those comments and questions from the audience. Given what we've learned through this research, what would you like to know more about? Where do you think we should go next in our understanding of this issue? So if we can start with Sandra and then on to Paul, I think, and then finally with Andy. So where should we go next with our understanding?
I think it stems a little bit for me from some of the questions that came in, have been coming in. It's good to see how we can expand it potentially and break it down. To look at things, as someone's noted, you looked at the impact on women. I think that was a really good segment, and I would encourage people, if they're still available, to look to visit or watch that webinar that we did earlier, but also on ethnic minorities, potentially to look at some of the work we did in specific areas. You know, a lot of the research that we did previously as a commission looked at cold spots and hot spots and looked at different regions around the country, and is there anywhere where we can see real differences or real impact that we could really focus our efforts in. And I think the research that can do that and really draw it into areas is when authorities, government, employers can really then target their initiatives. So I think the ability to sort of break it down further is something that I think we can take further. And I think we absolutely have to continue to raise awareness. Everything that Andy has said about the system that we have and whether it's fit for purpose can only really is going to gain momentum if people are talking about this and challenging it and be able to demonstrate that it's not working. So I think those are all good. And I think the case studies that you started to highlight in your presentation, Paul, and the impact that improving confidence can have is always a powerful thing for moving the agenda along. So that sort of case study and a more in-depth look on an individual basis, or for the tutors that are working in this area, and the impact and the change they've seen are always things that I think are good, and we should explore making sure we're doing plenty of that. So I think that's where I would like to see go further.
Thanks very much, Sandra. So a couple of things there, breaking it down further, looking, for example, at ethnic diversity, for example, and really looking into the depth of those case studies. Paul, where would you like us to go next with this?
Well, it's actually following on from that case studies point. The research can only go so far at the moment in terms of understanding the impact that improved numeracy, confidence and skills is having. And ideally, what we'd like to be able to do is to be able to follow people further along and really understand the impact that we're having on a more profound level in terms of improving their job prospects, their life outcomes, and their prosperity, social mobility. So that's really where we would like to go next. And then also touching on this similar point to Sandra is just getting everyone to understand that it's confidence. Confidence is the start. That should be the prefix of any skills, number skills intervention. That's what we're starting to find. So to find out more about that as well, and to get everybody, and I can see it in the signs of the multiply programs that are around, there's more talk about confidence, nowhere near enough, because there is this fixation on qualification. But if it can be prefixed by looking at number confidence, that would be amazing.
Great, thank you, Paul. And we're fast running out of time. We're not going to run over today, so I do want to come to Andy in just a moment. But I wonder if I could be cheeky, Andy, and add on an extra question for you, because it's probably the last one we're going to be able to get to with the time that we've got, which is, as well as where we should go next, there's a number of questions and comments coming through on the Q&A about how, if and how we should be looking at numeracy in connection with other things like literacy, given some of the challenges we have around other skills, other basic skills and foundational skills. Is there a role perhaps for looking at us joining up and thinking of this more broadly in terms of the skills that we might need as a foundation in work? So if you could possibly touch on that as well, Andy, that would be great, because I think that's going to take us to a conclusion.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I'll certainly have a go at that. I mean, on the research side, I'd love to see a slightly more granular, indeed quantitative, build on the research set out today. We know at a quantitative level that numeracy is tripping up income and job prospects, and we know on average the wage premium from low numeracy, or wage discount from low numeracy, is what, 1,600 quid or whatever. I'd love to see that broken down in more granular detail to explore the intersectionality of different dimensions, ethnicity, gender, poverty, and the like. So I imagine those wage discounts could vary very significantly, and it would certainly be very different fractions of the average pay packet of people in those cohorts. So I'd love to see that as an elaboration of the research so far. And to your point about the broader set, if you like, Sam, of foundational skills, I mean, one way of recharacterizing and indeed reorienting our education and skills system would be away from disciplinary silos, literacy, numeracy, English and maths, and rather looking at the capabilities, the generic capabilities we'll need for the future world of work, and asking what attributes we need, which will also include numeracy and literacy, and indeed digital literacy, to make good on them. So the lens then would be, how best do we nurture critical thinking? How best do we nurture problem solving? How best do we nurture empathy? How best do we nurture communication? How best do we nurture creativity rather than any one disciplinary silos? Those capability buckets naturally straddle current disciplinary silos. It might be a better way in to educating our kids for the jobs they'll need for tomorrow rather than past century.
Oh, that's so interesting. Thank you, Andy. Looking more across at capability in education. We are going to have to bring things to a close because I do not want to run over. You all will have busy days. If you, I've tried to get through as many of the comments and questions as possible as we've gone along. If you do have a burning question that you don't feel we've answered and you want an answer, please do email our colleague Miller. Miller's details are on the invite and on the confirmation. Miller will direct your question to the right person and we'll make sure you get a prompt response. To close, I want to say a massive thank you again to Capital One and to research partners who we do really have to thank for this research and its many insights. And of course, a big thanks to our incredibly interesting, insightful and knowledgeable panel today. A big thank you to Sandra, to Andy and to Paul. Now, I said at the beginning of this webinar, this is the second of three. The third, honing in on number confidence specifically, will take place on the 1st of November at 9 AM. Details will be shared with each of you really shortly following this session. That's also going to include a briefing which covers the findings that have been discussed today and that Paul outlined early in the session. So please do have a look at that. And as always, the briefing also shares National Numeracy's recommendations, which we hope will be relevant, help prompt and provoke action. And you will not be surprised, I think, to learn that many of those really do tie in with what's being talked about today and suggested as approaches for the future. So my final thanks just to all of you for giving up your valuable time this morning, for joining today's webinar. It really is appreciated. I hope that it's been of interest and insightful today. Thank you so much for joining. Please do enjoy the rest of your days, and we'll close the session there. Thank you.